Last week, after the forthcoming Roe v. Wade decision from the Supreme Court leaked, there was immediately speculation about who did the leaking. Now, much of the speculation was really in bad faith. It was right wingers arguing that the real problem here is that there was a leak rather than the fact that women's rights are going to be potentially set back by decades, thanks to a number of activist judges placed on the Supreme Court by failed former President Donald Trump. So the issue isn't actually the leaker. But the right wanted to make the leaker the issue, and the right immediately said, obviously, this is a left-wing leaker who wants to pressure justices to change their votes to keep Roe v. Wade by making them fear for their lives and followed from there. And as I said last week, we don't know the political orientation of the leaker. There are two at least equally plausible explanations. One is the leaker is on the left. The leaker is pro-choice. And the idea of the leaker was, I'm going to leak this now so that the justices planning to vote to overturn Roe v. Wade will be pressured and they will be harassed and they might fear for their lives. And they'll say, OK, I'll keep Roe v. Wade. Now, these are appointments for life. Supreme Court justices of great security. It's not super likely that that is actually the case, but it is a possibility. Just as likely is the opposite. And again, we didn't know one way or the other, but just as likely is the hypothesis that the leaker is right wing. Why would a right winger leak the decision? A right winger would leak the decision to make sure that by making the expected votes public, none of the justices that are, at least as of the February draft, planning to vote to overturn Roe v. Wade change their minds. Imagine that, I don't know, Kavanaugh was on the overturn Roe side back in February when the draft was written, but since is thinking, maybe I should vote to keep it. The idea would be a right winger leaks it to put pressure on those justices not to change their votes. Either one is possible. But now we are actually getting more and more information that the right wing leaker scenario is the more probable one. Nina Totenberg, who is a longtime Supreme Court reporter, says actually the main theory now is that this was a right wing clerk who leaked this. Take a listen.
In covering the court since the early days of Roe, how much has this leak rattled the institution and the way it's viewed?
Well, the way it's viewed, it's an earthquake. And I think within the court itself, it's an earthquake. There has never been a leak like this. There have been minor little springs that have emerged from the court. Reports of a tentative vote or misbehavior by one justice back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. There were leaks, those kinds of leaks, but never an entire draft of a majority opinion. That has never, ever occurred before. And it can only, in all likelihood, have come from a justice. That I think is less likely, perhaps one of the clerks, and the leading theory is a conservative clerk who was afraid that one of the conservatives might be persuaded by Chief Justice Roberts and to join a much more moderate opinion. And then there's another theory that it was an outraged liberal clerk. But I think the only one that makes sense is that it came from somebody who was afraid that this majority might not hold, that Chief Justice Roberts might persuade one of the conservatives to come over to him.
So this type of reporting is increasingly pointing to a right winger. Now, we may never know, but remember, Ted Cruz and others were saying jail the leaker. They were assuming it was a liberal and they were saying you got to jail them. Ted Cruz actually went on Fox News and said the leaker should be jailed. Remember this?
The reason it was leaked is some left-wing, presumably law clerk, wanted to put political pressure on the 5 justices that presumably are in the majority right now. They wanted to put heat and they wanted to invoke politics to try to get them to change their vote. And by the way, if that left-wing law clerk succeeds, it will be the most grotesque politicization of the Supreme Court in the history of our nation. You mentioned an FBI investigation. I hope there is a serious one, and I hope whoever is responsible for this not only is fired instantly, but is prosecuted and serves real jail time for violating the confidences of the Supreme Court.
And then the last real liberal, by which I mean a right-wing reactionary, Tulsi Gabbard, she went on TV and also said, we've got to prosecute and jail. But what's the crime, Tulsi? She didn't say.
To be heard. I think it's also critical to point out that this leak sets a very, very dangerous precedent for our Supreme Court for three important reasons. Number one is, first of all, this person is a thief who stole this information, released it with a very specific intent to try to incite protesters and intimidate and pressure our Supreme Court justices to make a political decision rather than a decision that is based on the Constitution. Number two, we have the fact that the Supreme Court is not in place to legislate from the bench. People's representatives at the state level, at the federal level, are charged to make laws, not the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court needs to make decisions based on the Constitution. And the Department of Justice, lastly, needs to go and prosecute this crime, which is exactly what it is, and make an example out of the person who leaked this information, because our Supreme Court justices cannot operate under the fear that they will have partisan political activists in their house intimidating and threatening their ability to do their job per the Constitution.
And there was
Do they still want them jailed if it is a right winger? But more importantly, will we ever actually find out who did it? I don't know that we will. One of our sponsors is Cheese Butter, giving you 20% off. Cheese Butter is a delicious gourmet cheese melt that ingeniously blends 4 indulgent cheeses and artisanal seasoned butter. I love this stuff. Cheese butter is the type of thing you've got to try to really understand. There are so many different things I was already putting cheese and butter on, but by combining top shelf cheeses and butters together, Cheese Butter unlocks a new level of tasty gourmet goodness. And there are actually several cuisines with sauces that mix these ingredients. It may be new to you, but it is a tried and true combination. Very often, cheese butter will make an appearance when I'm cooking at home. I put it on French and sourdough bread, bagels, English muffins. It's great on sandwiches, grilled cheese, burgers, baked potatoes, mac and cheese, broccoli, broccolini, my beloved broccolini, other vegetables. I'm sure there's lots of other home chefs in the audience who can come up with some great ways to use cheese butter. And you'll now get 20% off when you go to cheesebutter.com/Pacman. The link is down below.